Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I am super excited to have you on, and there are a few topics that I really want to dive into today with you. But I think before we do that, could you take just a little bit of time and introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. Thanks, Zach. I'm happy to be here. So I am a psychiatrist. I practice in Philadelphia. I see adults with anxiety disorders, including OCD, insomnia, interpersonal challenges. And then I also have a podcast called The Reflective Doc, where I try and just share, similar to what you're doing here, helpful, practical information for people who may be struggling with mental health challenges, maybe can't get in to see a provider, or there aren't enough of us. And so that's another sort of wing of my practice that I have now, which has been really gratifying because so many people have so much good work to share.
I agree. And it feels like resources are low-cost resources, free resources are so important just because it can be difficult to actually get in and see somebody. So I'm just happy that we live in a time period where this type of information can be spread fairly easily. I'm curious, how did you, because treating OCD is very niche. I feel like so is treating insomnia. Maybe you have a different perspective on that. But how did you get into treating OCD, and what was the path that sort of led you there?
Definitely. I mean, my background was coming from a medical school at Columbia that was really strong in psychiatry. And then I was at UCLA, and there's sort of this theory that there's more psychodynamic work on the East Coast, more behavioral work on the West Coast. And, it's not completely true, but did learn a lot about cognitive behavioral therapy for different anxiety disorders at UCLA and did a clinic where I worked with a number of individuals with OCD. And I just found it to be such an active therapy that people were really working hard. We were really being creative in the process of the exposure and response prevention. Just really enjoyed it and found that, we all try and find where we can do the most good and where we resonate. And I find working with people with anxiety is something that I really enjoy, but also feel like I resonate with that. I can help people kind of clarify their thoughts and really start to decrease some of those intrusive thoughts. So if you align with something you enjoy that really seems to help people, I think it became a good fit. And insomnia and anxiety go hand in hand. I mean, so much of insomnia really is anxiety about not sleeping well. And so they tend to kind of go in line. And the sleep issue, I just was having so many patients struggling with it, and I didn't have great answers. So I thought, I'm just going to figure it out. I'm going to do all the research I can see out there, read everything I can. And now I really enjoy talking about it, and it's such a big issue for people.
That feels like the perfect dovetail into talking about insomnia. So let's talk about insomnia, because I think it's really interesting that you said you're like, insomnia is essentially anxiety about basically being able to fall asleep and stay asleep and get a good night's rest. And I really appreciate your transparency around saying, hey, at the start, I wasn't really 100% confident on how to treat it, but I wanted to figure out how. So that, I think, is such a beautiful thing to hear from a practitioner, somebody who's in the field doing this work, just to say, hey, look, I'm trying to figure it out too, but I'm always striving to find the best treatment. So through that process, let's take a step back. Can you, for somebody who knows nothing about insomnia or knows very little, can you explain insomnia to me?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of different things I'd like to start off with. One is that insomnia and sleep deprivation are actually two very different things. And that sleep deprivation is defined sort of 6 hours or fewer multiple nights in a row, or 6 hours or fewer in a 24-hour period, right? Some people work at night and try and sleep during the day. So sleep deprivation really is just not enough, not adequate sleep. And often it's due to not adequate opportunity for sleep. Maybe someone's working several jobs, or maybe they're up online, really late into the night and they have to wake up early the next morning, so they don't even have 6 hours in bed. So sleep deprivation, as we know, we won't get into so much today, but has a lot of different health effects. We're learning more and more every day about its effects on our immune system, inflammation, our hearts, certainly our brains as far as our mood and our thinking, as well as metabolism and weight changes. So we know sleep deprivation can be really detrimental, and millions of Americans don't get enough sleep. Insomnia is actually more probably get enough sleep, roughly enough sleep. I just don't like the quality of it. It doesn't feel refreshing. It's not happening when I want it to. I can't fall asleep when I want to or stay asleep, or I'm waking up earlier than I want to. And a big part of insomnia is just anxiety about that, starting to then dread the night as it starts to come. Like, oh, okay, I'm getting ready for bed now. I know it's going to be a terrible night. Or what if I don't sleep well and tomorrow morning I'm a total mess? Or I go on this interview and I stumble over my answers because I didn't get enough rest, right? Some of the catastrophic, anxious thoughts around it. And that's what really can perpetuate insomnia. I think it's important for people to know we all have nights that we just don't sleep that well. Maybe we have a bad cold, or a kid is up, or we just are under some stress, have something exciting happening, kids before Christmas, for example. But when we start to worry about that and start to think, oh, this is a problem, it's probably going to happen again, now what? And we start to dread it and start to worry about it, that's what actually keeps it around so that it doesn't resolve kind of on its own. And then it can become chronic as people start to define themselves. Like, I'm a bad sleeper, I've never been able to sleep, these kinds of comments. So I love to get people like that into my practice, because very quickly we can start breaking down some of those ideas and get them back on track for good sleep.
Yes. And I'm thinking about loved ones in my life right now who I just realized that I told you, I always try to think about who's the episode for, and then I ask questions as if they were in the room. So I have those people in mind now. I will tell you, it's interesting that you bring that up. I actually noticed this last night. We've got a little bit of a nighttime routine. It's not strict and rigid, just because with OCD, I also understand like it's really important that I allow for nuance and just to avoid turning something into a compulsion, right? Or something like that. So last night I was in bed and I was reading Brave New World, which is by Aldous Huxley. It's like a, literary classic, if you will. But I noticed, and I've noticed this before, that as I'm gearing up for bed, like I'm like, okay, I'm reading this book because I'm detaching from blue light. I'm no longer doing phone, TV. I'm not going to be having any stimulating conversations with my wife right now. I'm reading this book to purely have some enjoyment, go off into a different world, not have any blue light, blah, 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 all the things that they teach you. I noticed, oh, wow, I'm feeling a little anxious about whether I'm going to be tired enough to fall asleep or if I'm going to toss and turn tonight. It's not the first time that I've experienced that feeling. And I have had days, to your point, and even weeks where I'm not getting the quality level of sleep that I would like. But I think because of ERP and OCD, I sort of have this mentality where it's like, maybe I'll get a good night's sleep tonight. Maybe I won't. And you know what? If tomorrow's I'm a little tired, we'll figure it out. And it's almost been this thing that doesn't allow it to snowball. So I'm so curious, when somebody comes in with you touched on this. Most of the time, do they come in with a belief system that they're not good sleepers and that, either they can't fall asleep or it's guaranteed 100% that at some point in the night they're going to they're going to be wide awake, they're going to wake up, and they're just not going to be able to go back to bed?
Absolutely. That comes up a lot. I'm a bad sleeper. My parents were bad sleepers. It's genetic, some of these things. And we really don't have a lot of evidence that there are genetic, risks for insomnia. There are genetic risks for anxiety, certainly. And so is that a secondary effect? But they absolutely do come in that way. And I do have to kind of teach them and help them understand that, look, sleep is this incredibly powerful drive. If you think about it, we're 8 hours of, hopefully, ideally, so not being totally conscious, being vulnerable to predators back in the day. So something's really crucially important about those sleep hours. And like I said, sleep deprivation, really bad for our health. So telling them it's really a powerful drive. And if we remove the different barriers and roadblocks that are getting in the way, like really anxious thoughts, overly stimulating environments, uncomfortable environments, we're going to get you back to sleep. Like your brain's going to take the sleep it needs. We just have to figure out what's getting in the way of this incredibly natural process. And usually that can be reassuring as they start to think like you were just saying, that's such a beautiful way to approach it. Like, yeah, I might not sleep that well, but I'll get through it tomorrow. I'll be a little tired. Maybe I'll be a little snacky, a little grouchy, but I'll get through it. And people will get into this mindset of, if I don't sleep, what if, they don't even think what would happen, it just sounds something bad. Or like, I'll be a total mess. I'll be a total catastrophe. And that's really what we're trying to challenge with some of the cognitive work we do for insomnia.
So you'll see me, I like to scribble things down as the conversation goes. So if you see me writing, that's what it is, because I always like to come back to points. So let's talk about some of these. You mentioned, hey, if we were able to remove some roadblocks, I'm assuming that there are some cognitive roadblocks, if you will, and then there are some things in people's environments. You're the professional here. Which roadblock do you want to, and how many different roadblocks are there? So you guide me. Where can we start to help people listening to this episode begin to remove some of those roadblocks for themselves?
Yeah, so maybe why don't we divide it into internal factors and external factors? I think the external ones are a little bit easier, dare I say, to change. It's harder to change our thinking process. So some of the things about environment, you hear a lot about something called sleep hygiene, which are all the different things, like you said, removing the blue light, not having a really stimulating conversation, these kinds of things. So there's a whole series of things that attribute to good sleep hygiene. And that's really kind of setting, like making the bed, setting the table for a good night of sleep. It isn't going to be a huge sea change for people. They may try these things and come in and say, I did all of those things and I'm still not sleeping. Okay, then we want to address those internal factors. But it's things like a dark room, a quiet room, cool room. You don't want to have really stimulating activity right before bed, a really, vigorous exercise, a really heavy meal. Alcohol is a really important one. People think, okay, it does help calm me down. It helps make me sleepy. The trouble is, as your body breaks down alcohol, metabolites or the breakdown products it creates are really stimulating. So they kind of wake you up, or they mean you don't sleep as deep and restoratively as you would otherwise. So anxiety is alcohol backfires when it comes to insomnia and treatment. So not drinking ideally right before sleep, really kind of keeping that bedroom environment as comfortable and sleep ready as possible. For people that are doing shift work and trying to sleep during the day, I'm all for blackout curtains. They can wear a mask, they can wear earplugs, white noise, things like that. Whatever it is that kind of sets the stage, having a bit of a routine, even from dinner onward. What's your usual routine? I don't know if Brave New World would be my recommended text right before bed. I feel like it's a little dystopian, so I might say maybe
You're
something more relaxed. So, it's finding out, right? If you're watching the nightly news or you're watching something really stimulating right before bed, that's not always ideal. If I watch a really good basketball game, it is hard for me to fall asleep afterwards because I'm so fired up. So
Amen.
Really being aware of that. But as you pointed out, whether it's with OCD or otherwise, not being overly rigid about it, because that itself becomes the issue, right? I can't go out to dinner with you because if I'm not home by 9 to start my routine, et cetera, right? Starting to constrict your life in order to prioritize sleep. What we really want is for sleep to just feel like a natural process and just be integrated into your life, but not something that you make a bunch of other changes around or really structure things around trying to sleep, like trying harder to sleep. Because honestly, the harder you try to sleep, sometimes the more difficult it becomes. It's really a process of letting go. And I think all of us struggle with that from one time or another, to just let go and kind of let go of the day. My mom's always like, I hate going to bed. I miss out on fun. I just want to stay awake and see what else is happening. But honestly, it's such a gift to be able to get a good night's rest. It's so good for you. My kids are so tired of hearing me say that, but it's like if they're sick, I'm like, what's the best thing to do? And they're like, I know, Mom, sleep. I said, yeah, that's right, because it really can be healing. So I think about it as a luxury. When I get into bed, I'm like, this is wonderful.
It is. I absolutely love sleep. And there's a chapter in my book titled Give Yourself the Gift of Sleep. So I am so on board with that. I didn't always think that way. As a young man, I just thought sleep was a nuisance. It was something you had to do. It was optional. And once I experienced the onset of OCD, I quickly realized, wow, on a daily basis, depending on how much sleep I got the night before, can really dictate how I feel the next day. But I think that that's regardless of whether you have OCD or not. It's sleep is so important. And like you said, it is such a luxury and such a gift. There were a few things that you touched on. Alcohol. First I'll give you my perspective on alcohol. I completely agree with that. And I had no idea until I started tracking my sleep that two things occur for me. I can't speak for everybody else, but for me when I drink. The first thing is exactly what you talked about as your body is metabolizing the alcohol. I feel a drum line in my chest. So my anxiety spikes way up, and it wakes me up. I'm kind of in this like foggy, half awake, half asleep. Like I'm still laying there and I'm not moving, but I'm definitely not deep in sleep. And that was like one of the big things. That's like the second thing that I noticed. So the anxiety is the first. The second is that I use an app called Auto Sleep, and it basically tracks quantity, quality, and then how much deep sleep you get every single night. Even a glass of wine is enough to completely derail, for me. Again, I can't speak for everybody, but my wife and I both track our sleep now, so I can speak for 2 people. That's our sample size. For 2 people, even 1 glass of wine completely derails our deep sleep, which to me is the metric that matters the most. Like if I get 10 hours of sleep, but I only get 30 minutes of deep sleep, I still feel groggy and honestly horrible the next day. That's for me. I know some people can kind of get through it. For me, I don't feel like myself at all. And the perfect example is we had a little get together with friends last night, and everybody was having a glass of wine, and my wife and I had a workout in the morning this morning. And, you know, we love our friends to death, and everyone was just like, it's just 1 glass of wine, you'll be fine. And I'm like, that's how I used to think. Like, I agree with you that I understand where you're coming from, but my wife and I both know that 1 glass of wine comes with such bigger consequences than I would have ever imagined back in the day, which it's like, it's so much better to be informed, but it's also just such a bummer. It's like, yeah, 1 glass of wine actually there's a cost to pay for that. So I thought that was interesting that you brought that up. Cannabis as well is another one of those substances that I know people use to help fall asleep. It was the exact same thing for me. I'll be honest with you, Jennifer, and I'm very honest with my audience. I was a habitual pot smoker for 5 or 6 years of my life. Unhealthy coping strategy. And I thought that it made me feel more calm. I thought it helped me fall asleep at night. And in reflection, it's like it did neither of those 2 things. It just masked the feeling of anxiety. I was still anxious. So then I didn't address the anxiety head on. And then I was never getting a good night's sleep. So it was just this perpetual loop that I was in. So I thought that was a really, really good point. And I want people to think about that. Like even just 1 glass of wine, or just I talk a lot to young adults. So like kids in college, even just 1 hit off your weed pen is enough to just ruin your night's sleep. I also loved how you touched on conditions of the room, the sleep hygiene aspect. My wife and I started doing a sleep mask and earplugs, and I thought we were so bougie. I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe I'm one of those people. I'm sleeping with a sleep mask and earplugs. I've been doing that for years now. Completely changed the game. It is how I sleep everywhere. It doesn't matter if I'm on the road traveling for speeches or if I'm here in California. I am wearing that mask in those earplugs, and then letting go. That was such a great point that you brought up. And letting go, it applies to, like, when you think about anxiety, when you think about people in general, I feel like we all have this, like, I've realized this in myself, almost like the analogy is like white knuckling life. Like, I have to be in control. I have to be the one with the answers. I have to know what's going on, and I have to be the one to make the decisions. And basically it all boils down to, we want to be in control. And for me, again, I can't speak for others, but for me, that desire for deep control, I learned how to apply letting go in the OCD world and with intrusive thoughts, but I didn't do it with other categories in my life. And then one day I woke up and I was like, what am I doing? Why am I not letting go and just sort of taking the hands off the wheel and saying, everything is, I want to believe that everything is going to be fine, that everything is going to work out, I say that the universe has my back and things are going to flow naturally, and I don't have to force anything, which is exactly what you talked about with sleep. That a big part of falling asleep at night is not trying to force sleep, but instead just letting go. Just to your point, letting the brain take and do what it's always done since the beginning of our evolution when you talked about, you know, how we're vulnerable when we sleep. So clearly it's an important function. So I wanted to really emphasize what stood out to me, because I think that you brought up some really good points around external factors that I think a lot of people, it's especially for me, like I wasn't aware of sleep hygiene at the start of this journey. And it took conversations like with people like you for me to begin to change that perspective. Is there anything from an external standpoint that you feel like you would want to emphasize in addition to what I talked about and what you already mentioned? Anything else that really stands out?
Yeah, no, I love how you highlighted those are such key points that you brought up. I think that another issue that does come up a lot are really who's in bed with us. I think that even pets can be an issue in that they could keep people awake. And you talked about when you use alcohol and maybe you're getting 10 hours of sleep, but a half hour of really deep restorative sleep, it takes some time to drop into those deep stages of sleep. We kind of move down through those stages. We have some REM sleep. We come back down again. And so say you're sleeping with someone who really snores, or you're sleeping with a pet who really snores or moves around a lot. If you keep waking up throughout the night, this is what happens to people with obstructive sleep apnea. They wake up throughout the night because of the trouble that they were having with their breathing. And we can get into that if helpful. But I think when you find that something is waking you up over and over again, you're not getting into that deep restorative sleep or even often REM sleep. And so that can really make it not an effective night's sleep. So I tell people, like, you can love your pet, you can absolutely love your partner. Let's try and be the best version of yourself you can be tomorrow by getting a good night of rest tonight. And maybe that means you're in separate bedrooms. And some couples just decide that that works for them. I think there was an article in the Times on this recently. It works for them. They both wake up, they feel recharged, and really go about their day feeling their best. So it's always a conversation. How do we, for example, in couples, maintain intimacy without sleeping in the same bed together and make sure that we both are getting what we need to be healthy and happy?
I think that that's a really, really good point. And it's funny, sometimes my wife will show the data and she'll be like, did you get up to use the restroom in the middle of the night? Because it shows that I was awake, but I don't think I was. And I look at the time, I'm like, yep, that was me. So then, of course, the question becomes, well, was that disruptive? As of right now, she's saying no. Also, I think that she would have a heart attack if I proposed that I sleep in a separate room. But I think that that is a very valid point. And certainly pets, I know it's so common now for people to allow their pets to sleep with them in bed. The big word being disruptive, that's what stood out to me. Anything that's disruptive. And you talked about news. I think that there are a lot of Americans that have a habit of, whether it's a sporting event for me, like if I watch a Purdue basketball game, I need a couple hours to calm down after the game. Like I can't watch that game and then go right to sleep. So I have to be mindful of that. I think it's the exact same thing with the news, like what you talked about. I think if you're watching one of the big media outlets, their goal is to stimulate you. I mean, the goal of media is to create fear and outrage and anger, and because it sells, it gets people's attention, and it gets you to dial in and spend time watching what they have to say. So, like, I remember back in 2020 when obviously there was a lot of political turmoil, not saying that there isn't still, but I just distinctly remember this. I remember there was this one day where I was kind of engaged in the news. I don't really watch the news that much anymore for the exact what I'm about to say. The entire time I was going to bed, I just had this dialogue, like this separate part of my brain that just kept talking about what I'd been watching that day on the news and just debating it and going back and forth. And it was so frustrating because there was nothing that I could do to turn it off.
Yeah.
And after that, moving forward, I basically adopted the belief system. If I'm less informed and this offends somebody in my friend circle that I didn't know about the most recent thing, then so be it. Because to your point, sleep is a gift, and I don't want to jeopardize that. So for me, I do think it's very interesting that you touched on really stimulating media, sporting event, maybe something that you're seeing on Instagram or social media as something that could really impact your sleep for multiple hours before going to bed.
Yeah, absolutely. And also even think about how are you consuming your media? Because when it's just flashes of images, our brain, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and our brain very quickly responds to images or sounds. So how do you want to even consume that media? If you decide you need to be informed, is it with an actual newspaper, like physical print newspaper, or is it something that's not quite as overstimulating because they're trying to make it really vivid or really exciting or really anger provoking? So I think it's important to kind of decide how you're consuming media and even to curate your social media feeds. I like to look at like puppies and kitties on there. I can do that all day. I follow a number of art museums. They put up a beautiful painting. I'm not following people that really get me angry or frustrated or anxious.
Jump into sleep apnea. As a psychiatrist, do you recommend that people limit their news intake and how they consume that news? Do you have a stance on that? I'm curious.
I absolutely do. I mean, again, how disruptive is it to their mood and anxiety? I mean, there are times where I'll just say to my husband, just stop. Stop reading the news. Stop going on and looking at these websites. Like, I can see it stressing you out. I can see it making you unhappy. And I do it for myself, too. I mean, these things are so salient. You get caught up and you really want to find out what happens next. So I sort of put myself on a hiatus as well. So it's a discussion I have with patients. What makes sense for you? Are you noticing a pattern that when you're on social media more, you're more anxious, you're not sleeping as well, it's interfering with other activities? What are the things we can replace it with if you're seeking connection? If you're feeling bored or lonely, what are other options that actually work better, right? What's a more sort of nutritious approach to those things rather than social media? Because it's like eating junk food. It just doesn't satisfy very well, and it can have secondary effects, right?
I love that analogy. It is. It sort of is junk food. You're consuming something, but there's no nutritional value there.
Right.
So very good point. What about sleep apnea? You said we can dive into that a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about how sleep apnea might impact somebody and what they can do to sort of remove some roadblocks there?
Right, absolutely. So sleep apnea is a clinical diagnosis. Basically what happens is, for any number of reasons, it can be their anatomy. It can be just something, the way that they're built, the way that they were born. There can be genetic risks for it. But what happens is essentially the airway, when they're sleeping and the sleeping position, can get cut off so that they're not able to get in breath. So you'll almost hear like a gasping sound or a choking sound. Certainly snoring can be an indication that might be a risk of sleep apnea. And because you stop breathing, the body kind of wakes up, startles itself awake so that you start breathing again, right? There's a powerful drive to breathe. And so what that does is bring you out of sleep over and over again as your body's trying to kind of restart the breathing apparatus, right? As you're kind of not able to breathe. So what we do is we want to do a diagnosis. We might do a sleep study where we see, is this happening? How often is it happening? And then there are different treatments for sleep apnea, including what we call a CPAP mask. So a continuous positive airway pressure. We push air into the airway and it holds up, sort of protects the airway. There are different other treatments. There's even one that's like an inserted device that they've come out with now, which I don't know too much about. I don't treat in a sleep center, but that would be where people could get more information about some of the newer options for treatment. But really it's about how do we keep that airway open. And it might happen to someone if they've gained weight and they've had sort of excess pressure in the airway, because that can just cause, any weight around the neck can cause some of this. So it can be anatomy, like I said, or it even can be certain medications and things. And what people notice is they're really tired the next day. They have headaches often when they wake up in the morning. It can be very hard to lose weight if you're trying to get to a different weight, depending on what your health is, because your body is really craving nutrition and food to stay awake. It kind of fires up that craving for high density, high calorie food. So people can just notice they're gaining weight, they're exhausted, they have headaches, it's hard to think, like how you feel if you're not getting a good night's sleep, and that's happening over and over again.
Yeah. That brings up the thought about brain fog, which is something that when I wake up, I rarely wake up feeling 100% refreshed. And I know that there's a lot of different angles to tackle that. I've cut out substances. I take like L-theanine before bed to kind of help calm me down. I meditate. I guess maybe I shouldn't be reading A Brave New World. I might need to find a new book, but I try to disengage from stimulating content. I I don't toss and turn. I do get up to use the restroom 1 to 2 times every single night. But I still wake up with brain fog most of the time. Any suggestions there on what to do about brain fog specifically?
Yeah, well, maybe if I were working with you, I'd want to know how long it lasted, if there were any patterns to it, right? We all have our natural circadian rhythm when our bodies like to fall asleep and like to wake up. So someone who's, a night owl is probably going to have a little bit more brain fog when they wake up in the morning, especially if they set an alarm and get up earlier than they'd like to, because they're still in this sleep. Their body still wants more sleep. It still wants to be in this pattern of sleep. So it could be determined by how the hours that you're sleeping and if that's truly aligned with your natural rhythm, if that's allowed, right? Night owls have a tough time because they often have to be up for work in the morning or school. The world is sort of more geared toward, morning people. So thinking about your circadian rhythm, but also like, what is your expectation? It's very normal to have some sort of slow coming out of that sleep process. You've had a long, wonderful night's rest. You're coming into kind of twilight sleep and coming out of that. It may take you a little time to feel like you're totally awake. Doing things that are stimulating can certainly help that. So taking a nice quick shower, getting some bright sunlight, so you're stimulating that part of the brain that shuts down the melatonin all the way, right? So things that are kind of stimulating can be helpful to get going. Certainly a cup of coffee is my go-to, whether or not that's always the healthiest choice. But I think that finding things that are stimulating can help bring you out of that. But as far as to totally prevent it, it might be really difficult to do so, to have sort of the perfect night's sleep. So not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good in this situation.
I love that. That response made me feel better. So that's probably going to help a lot of people out. Yeah. And I would say I'm so because I love what I do, I just want to wake up and I want to be energized and I want to go do it.
Yeah.
And my wife is much more like, slow down. Like, you can lay in bed for a second and let your body naturally wake up, which is the path that she chooses to take. I wake up, and I know that this habit isn't right. So to everybody listening, I'm well aware that this is one of my toxic traits, that I want to wake up and I want to hit the ground running. So I wake up, I make her a warm glass of lemon water, and I make myself an espresso. So 2 different vibes. In the morning. I then go on to meditate and then go work out and then start the work day. But for me, I think it's a belief system thing. Like, I want to wake up and get going. But to hear what you had to say about it, there's a natural process there that does make me feel a lot better, just because there are times when I do wake up where I'm like, whoa, I am wide awake and ready to go. The other thing I'll say is that for me personally, I can't speak for others, but I am neither a night owl nor a morning person. So it makes things very interesting. Like, I'm ready to go to bed by 9:30, 10, but I could also sleep until like 7:30, 8. No problem. Like, I could be very content waking up at 8, but I also have this desire to kind of get up and take on the day. So that's a me thing. I do feel happy and satisfied with the amount of sleep that I'm getting right now. I feel, generally speaking, in a good mood, but I was curious about the brain fog. Let's talk internal factors. On the note about belief systems, what belief systems do you see being prevalent amongst people that struggle with insomnia?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we touched on it some before, right? This idea that I'm a poor sleeper, I can't fall asleep. If I don't do X, Y, and Z, then there's no way I'm going to be getting any sleep. If I don't take this particular pill, then I'm not going to get any sleep. And there can be really a psychological dependency that can occur with some of the different medications, or whatever people assume is going to be their sleep aid. Maybe they take an over-the-counter melatonin, and if they don't have that, they're sure they won't sleep. Maybe they think they need to use cannabis before bed, or they won't sleep. So some of those different mindsets, that they need something external, or they need some behavior, or they need something in particular to be in place every single time, or they're not going to sleep. I think that can be a belief system that we can really try and challenge. I think there are some different strategies that we work on if people are finding that every time they get into their bed, maybe they fell asleep on the sofa or they felt really sleepy, and they get into bed and suddenly they're wide awake. We start thinking about it's a conditioned response. So like Pavlov's dogs, when they would salivate when they heard the bell, because it was conditioned for them. So we can become conditioned to see our bed is something awful, something where we lie there, we stare up at the ceiling, we're frustrated, we're anxious, or we can start to recondition that the only time we're in bed is really when we're ready for a good night's sleep. I mean, the sleep books and experts will say only use your bed for sleep and sex. Sex is up to you, but when it comes to sleep, absolutely that's what you're going to be doing there. So you're not going to be watching TV, working in bed, even reading in bed by the absolute strictest standards. I don't have the problem with someone reading a book in bed if it feels like it's soothing for them. But it's really, how do I create what we talked about earlier, this sense that going to bed is this luxury, it's this wonderful thing. This is where I go to bed. This is where I sleep. These are my amazing sheets, my pillow. So it's really kind of conditioning this positive response for the bedroom. And there can be people with maybe traumatic experiences at night, and that's a whole other process, right? Because nighttime really is fraught and creates anxiety as they approach it. So it's not just they're going to work on this themselves. They might need some added support or some specific therapies in this area. But really, it's how do we create this environment where bedroom is our wonderful place for sleep.
I think that you brought up a very valid point, even with the reading in bed, which I had those exact thoughts last night where I was like, maybe I should have been reading this book out on the couch. And just when I come into the room, the teeth are already brushed and it's just plop down in bed, go to sleep. Because both my wife and I have an absolute love affair with our bed. We love the sheets, we love the mattress, we love our pillows. And we sort of set it up that way because it's like, okay, you're spending about somewhere between 8 to 10 hours a night every single day in this bed. Like, let's actually make it a place that we want to be. So I like that you pointed that out, sort of making your bedroom and your bed a place where you get excited to go to sleep. And I understand that everybody comes from different means, and everybody comes from different backgrounds. And my wife and I are certainly blessed enough to be able to have like a mattress that we're excited about and sheets that we're excited about. So I recognize that, but I do think that within the context of everybody's life, you can always try to work to improve your situation in terms of your sleeping situation. Regarding some of the belief systems that you brought up, like let's say somebody has a belief system, I'm not a good sleeper, this has run in my family for years. They might even say like, well, I have sleep apnea, and they have the CPAP, but they also have the belief system that they're not a good sleeper. Maybe I fall asleep fine, but I always wake up in the middle of the night wide awake, and then I just stay awake and can't fall asleep. What is the process of starting to unpack that belief system, and how do you start to help guide somebody towards a path of better sleep at night?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're working with that conditioned response to create that conditioning, what you tell people, and they don't love this, but that if you're lying in bed for maybe longer than 20 to 30 minutes, you're not going to fall back to sleep right away, you actually get up out of the bedroom and go somewhere else that's quiet and calming. Maybe you read there or just listen to quiet music, nothing too stimulating. You do not check work email or watch the news, for example. When you're feeling really sleepy again, then you get back into bed. So again, every time that you're in that bed, you're either really sleepy or you're asleep. That's going to be important for that conditioning. As far as the sort of thoughts that we have around sleep, some of it is, let's explore some of the thoughts that you're having when you wake up in the middle of the night. It is normal for each of us to wake up a little bit or come into that twilight sleep throughout the night, here and there. It's just a matter of how long does it take to get back to sleep, and what is it that might be keeping us awake. And some of that might just be our really anxious thoughts. If I wake up and I think there's no way I'm falling back to sleep, that itself is stimulating, that creates its own roadblock. So what we start to do is, okay, what are some different strategies that might help you be a little bit less anxious about waking up and not being able to fall asleep? Is it thoughts that I won't be any good tomorrow, or it's going to be a disaster? Then I ask them, okay, how many nights have you had trouble sleeping? Well, I don't know, maybe 50 over the past 6 months. How many times were you a total disaster the next day where something terrible happened? Maybe never. What was the next day like? And they can really restructure that a little bit so they can see it not quite as catastrophically. Like I said, maybe a little bit more tired or grouchy, what have you, but it's not catastrophic. So how do we try and change those thoughts in the middle of the night about what's happening the next day? I'll have people do different exercises to focus their attention, even mindfulness, working on creating this attention to the present moment. What does it feel like lying in this bed? Oh, it's quiet. What am I hearing? What am I feeling? What is this experience? Like anything that can keep you in this present moment means you're not worrying about tomorrow or like regretting yesterday. So we talk about mindfulness and even kind of a mindful, like an imagination exploration, some imagery work. Like I like to picture my childhood home, like walking through each room and trying to imagine where everything was and see if I can kind of picture it in my mind. Some people will go through the plot of their favorite movie, just something that gets enough of your attention, but it's not super stimulating, and it can be different for everybody. But just something that allows your mind to kind of have somewhere to be and something to do. Just like if you're trying to kind of bring a toddler over from some area to something else, you have to engage them. You have to give them a reason to pay attention to you. And that's sort of what you're doing with your mind in those moments, is getting it out of that anxious mind place and bringing it over maybe to more calm engagement in some of these exercises.
Yeah, because I know for myself and then other people in my life, a lot of times they'll snap awake in the middle of the night and it's anxious thoughts around a to-do list, things that need to get done tomorrow, things that, I don't want to forget this. I need to remember to do that. Oh shoot, I forgot to send this email. Any suggestions there on the productivity anxiety?
Yeah, I think there are different strategies. Sometimes people will keep a notebook beside the bed and they'll actually, before they go to bed, try and write down as many things as they can think of. Or if they wake up, quickly jotting it down there and going back to sleep. It doesn't always work for everybody. Sometimes that really wakes people up, so it sort of backfires. So sometimes it's a matter of, okay, how can I remind myself I'm going to be taking 10 minutes in the morning when I first wake up to kind of sit down with a notepad and think about all the things that I need to do that day. What's my to-do list, right? So keeping an overarching to-do list, and then each day thinking through and modifying that to-do list to make sure that there are pieces on there, the things that you need to do that day. And that's a strategy I actually use with people who have attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, is how do we help you stay focused? And those to-do lists can be really helpful. So it's about what are you doing during the day to help things stay really organized and stay on track so that it's not popping up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and I've heard of solutions like that before, and I think the way that I've heard it explained too is like it almost gives your brain that certainty of like, hey, I know you want to plan right now. I understand that. I get that. I promise you, I'm going to give you 10, 15 minutes in the morning to write everything down that needs to get done tomorrow, for the week, for the month, wherever you're at. Like, I'm going to give you the space to do it. And I'll tell you that has been a helpful strategy for me. Sometimes I'll wake up, not frequently, but occasionally I'll wake up and I've got the mind racing on like, what do I have to do tomorrow? What are all of the meetings that I have? What have I prepared for? What haven't I prepared for? So for me, like checking the calendar at around like 8 p.m. the night before, just to say, okay, these are my meetings. All right, my first meeting's at this time, so this is more or less when I need to get up. Just have a feel for, all right, I've got a couple podcasts. I've got, a meeting with the school for a potential speech. I'm working with a coaching client, whatever it might be. I just have an idea of what's going on tomorrow, which I think I've noticed once I started doing that, it was like, okay, I gave my brain permission to just, you can go to sleep, everything's going to be fine. And then implementing, even like telling myself, oh, I can get 10 to 15 minutes tomorrow before I start my day to go through everything that I have to do. So I want to, for people listening, I want to validate what you're saying, because I have tried those things. I am an anxious person naturally. And so everything that you mentioned, very simple tasks, exercises, tools that people can use, and they've been helpful for me. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and I think something that comes up is that people will kind of save all of their worrying till the end of the night or the end of the day, and then they get into their bed, and that's where it all kind of shows up. So part of it is, are there any other options throughout the day to try and manage and maybe release some of this anxiety, tension in the body, or even anxious thoughts? Because people will say, well, I don't have any anxiety until at night. And I think some of that is you're suppressing it, pushing it, holding it all down. And then when there's a little bit of time and space, it comes flaring right back up again. So what are the different ways to maybe target some of that anxiety throughout the day so that nighttime doesn't become such a time of a resurgence of those thoughts?
Wait, that is so important. That is such an important point, because I think you're right. I think most people, myself included, if we can, we'll have a tendency to keep ourselves busy so that we don't have to think about the things that are inevitably going to stress us out. And then at some point, when things go to slow down, we get just bombarded with those anxious thoughts. When you recommend to a client to block out some time to have that thinking, to address those thoughts, is it a journaling exercise? How do you recommend that people go about kind of addressing their to-do list, their anxious thoughts throughout the day?
Yeah, well, certainly I can even prescribe like a worry time where people just sit down and actively worry for 30 minutes, try and just worry about as many things as they can come up with. I do think that part of any of the CBT strategies that people do, first step is kind of increasing our awareness of those thoughts.
Yeah.
So trying to find a way, rather than just staying really, really busy and trying to suppress them, noticing them throughout the day with curiosity, with self-compassion. Like, okay, my anxious mind is saying this, or it's responding to this, and I'm just pushing that down. So how can I be aware of that and maybe start to challenge those thoughts, right? So if I'm thinking a what if worried thought, I may try to shift that into an if-then statement just in my mind, just that simple transition to get it out of that kind of worried part of the mind and into that sort of prefrontal cortex area that tells me this is what we're going to do about it, this is our plan, as opposed to that worrying part of the mind that just churns really without producing anything, right? So it's just using some of the different CBT strategies we use for anxious thoughts and doing that throughout the day once we have more awareness, but compassion that those are coming throughout the day.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Compassion has been like the theme of the week with guests that I've brought on the podcast. So it's interesting because I feel like we're not taught to show a lot of self-compassion or know how to. Do you have any suggestions on that front for people listening on how to show more compassion to your anxious thoughts, towards your belief systems around sleep, towards yourself around whether you're a good sleeper or not, like how you can create some of that compassion?
Yeah. So, Kristen Neff had done a lot of the work on self-compassion, and she kind of breaks it down into 3 areas. One being self-kindness, which is sort of what people think about with self-compassion, I think. The second one being that you're part of a much broader whole, that it's not just you as an individual, but you're sort of part of the world around you, the people and community around you. And the third really is practicing mindfulness. So the idea that you're in this present moment and you're being kind to yourself in that moment as you are part of humankind, you are part of this world, you are a valuable member of this world. And so I think those can be some helpful ways to think about, okay, these different steps. One exercise I have people try to do is, okay, let's say this situation is happening to your friend, your partner, your child. What would you say to them? And let's compare that to the words and the sentences that you use when you're saying something to yourself, right? Let's say you forgot a meeting. If your friend forgot a meeting, what would you say? Like, I'm sure it's okay. Give them a call. Everyone makes mistakes. What do you say to yourself? Maybe I can't believe you dropped that meeting. That was ridiculous. All these negative things.
Yep.
But you wouldn't say to other people. And I think an important piece about self-compassion in some of the research is that when people applied that, it actually made them more compassionate toward themselves, but also more compassionate to those people in their lives. And they were more likely to move toward those goals that they set for themselves. So it's not that the self-critical voice actually is like a great motivator and a good coach that just fires you up. It's actually, it can be harmful and actually can be detrimental to reaching those goals. So that there's also this benefit to self-compassion. If for people that are really productive focused or efficiency focused, it can help you along that path and you feel better as you go along, right?
I like that. And self-kindness being how you would talk to a friend, start to, if you notice yourself, you kept it PG, because if I miss a meeting, the first thought for me would be like, you're such an idiot, like you're so dumb. How could you do that? And I actually think that is more common. I think that the brain can be really intense. So I have noticed myself pausing and being like, wait a second, man. It's okay. Like, how are you supposed to know all that? A big one that I hear from other people and myself is like, something happens and you're like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I should have known what to do there. And it's like, well, wait a second. is that actually true? You know, like, should I have known to do this as an entrepreneur? I guess I'll put my reality on it. Like, as an entrepreneur, there's no blueprint or roadmap for this. It's just, you wake up every day and you create and you put one foot in front of the other, and it's like, you're just learning. I love how you brought up curiosity. That is something that I have really been trying to implement for about the last 6 months, which is, rather than either I need to know the answer to this or not. Like, basically it was more like, every time I didn't know the answer to something in entrepreneurship, I got mad at myself. And I noticed that I would create all this internal turmoil. And I was like, wait, time out. Because I meditate every day and I really try to engage in mindfulness, I was aware of the thoughts. I was aware of how I was speaking to myself, but then I wasn't doing anything to correct that. I was just letting that dialogue run, and I had to do some cognitive reframing and be like, wait a second. Why should you always know the answer? Like, is that a requirement of an entrepreneur? Is that you're all knowing and you go through life and you just know how to do entrepreneurship? Is that just how this works? Like, I'm confused, Zach. So, like, explain this to me. So I was like talking to myself. My wife's like, are you talking to yourself? I'm like, yeah, I'm doing an experiment here. Just let me do my thing. And what came out of that was like, curiosity is the replacement for me. And I love how you touched on that. Rather than this thought is good or bad, or this feeling is good or bad, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. Instead, for me, again, I can only speak for myself, curiosity. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why I just had that feeling. Now, of course, with OCD, I want to be very mindful. There are some intrusive thoughts that we don't want to get intrusive thoughts. Getting curious with them, it can lead you down the rabbit hole. So I'm more talking about, for me in my life, rather than, like, if I don't know an answer in entrepreneurship, rather than getting frustrated with myself, it's more like, I'm going to get curious about this and see if I can come out of this with a better understanding of how to do XYZ in entrepreneurship. Versus, and that's why I want to be very careful with this, rather than I have an intrusive thought about picking up a knife and harming somebody and getting quote unquote curious about that and being like, well, would I do that? Why would I have that thought? Because that is for everybody listening, that is a completely different rabbit hole. So I do want to make that differentiation. But I do think becoming aware of the self-critic in your head, and then really being able to develop a new relationship with that self-critic is a great point that you brought up, and it's been really important for me. It's an ongoing journey, but I do notice a deeper sense of peace in this new frame of mind that I've adopted, which certainly involves curiosity. The other thing I'll say, Jennifer, is, and this was another guest this week who talked about this, it seems like if you look into the outside world today, if you're looking for how to be in the world, how to move and operate and feel, and it seems like fear and stress are sort of the underlying emotions that are prevalent in our culture. And it almost feels like, I guess, for lack of better words, maybe there's like a deficiency in the spiritual aspect of things, in terms of this deep knowing or this deep trust in this idea that things are going to be fine, that everything is going to unfold and everything's going to be okay, and putting faith and trust that the universe has your back versus everything is catastrophic, everything is going to hell, everything is falling apart. And it feels like that knowing and that trusting isn't very prevalent in our society. Do you have any thoughts on that at all? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I think there can be sort of an observation bias in how we think the world is operating, because it depends on where we're looking and what we're reading and what we're seeing. So I think if you're truly looking inward and you're getting a sense of like, how am I feeling here? Or am I thinking about this? Or what is my experience? That's vastly different than saying, I feel kind of off. I'm just going to go on social media and like see what people are saying. I'm going to go on Twitter and just like see what people think about the world right now. Because people don't often post things that are sort of mundane and calm and, relaxed, right? It's not like, hey, everybody, I'm not really worrying about anything right now. I'm just chilling. Hope you're well. No one's going to retweet that.
So true.
But I think it's really important to notice that. So it's like, how do you also have the relationships within your own individual life that you're connecting with people, whether it's on the phone or in these sort of video calls or in person, that you're really looking at sort of that real authentic experience, both of you and of that person. Because we haven't evolved to really be able to understand people via social media and like a tweet or some other soundbite. We kind of need to see their body language, kind of get a sense of them and interact with them. And I think that's really important when it comes to that connection and getting an authentic sense of what is the world like? What does it feel like for me? And if there are changes I want to make, what are they? Are they based on my own needs and wishes? Or is it based on this perceived need to be comparing yourself to someone or competing or something like that? Entrepreneurs certainly have challenges with that, right? Because you can look out and find people on all levels and think, oh, this must be what I'm supposed to be feeling or thinking. And I think you described nicely kind of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is like, I should already know this. So if people think I don't know, then I'm going to be ashamed because I should know. As opposed to like, no, I don't know this. Like me with sleep. I don't know how to treat this just yet. I didn't learn much about this in med school. Let me see if I can figure it out. Having this growth mindset, seeking out, trying to learn, trying to grow, being curious, and knowing that if you don't know something, you don't know it yet. And you have the opportunity to know it, not like, I don't know something, therefore I am something shameful or feeling badly. So I think a growth mindset is really important as well.
I don't know it yet. Such a key word. And when I was in corporate America, we did a workshop on the power of the word yet. And it was so profound for me. I love that you just provided that example. So I wanted to really highlight that for people. I want to be respectful of your time. You did touch on fixed and growth mindsets. Are there any other fixed mindsets that you notice people have, generally speaking, in their life? Of course, anything related to insomnia that you have or haven't touched on, but any fixed mindsets that you think are helpful for people to maybe start to become more aware of, and then any growth mindsets that you think are worth people hearing about?
Yeah, I mean, fixed mindset. And I think keeping in mind that you can have a fixed mindset in certain aspects of your life and a growth mindset in another. Like I have this fixed mindset that I couldn't possibly do a TikTok. There's something about it that just really scares me. And I'm thinking, I could never do that. There's no way. Well, at some point, maybe I will do that if I can have a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
So it's these limiting thoughts that we have and these limiting statements. This is who I am. I'm just not good at that. I'm just not good at this. My son said the other day, I'm just not good at art. I'm like, oh, hold on a second here. Let's talk about that. Because anything like that, you're really limiting yourself. And there's so much life ahead of you. You really can't define yourself that way. So I think a fixed mindset can show up all over the place. I think kids really are done a disservice if they are taught a fixed mindset, like, oh, you're so smart. Therefore, if they ever are wrong about something or they don't know something, they feel like that challenges their identity of being smart. And therefore, they don't bring it up. As opposed to, there's been this shift to like tell them, well, I'm glad you're working hard. You really worked hard at that. You really put forth effort, praising the effort. That shows them effort's actually a sign of someone who's intelligent or who's doing something good, right? It's not that you're supposed to be effortlessly smart. So I think shifting to a growth mindset, look at any kid who's learning to walk. They just naturally have a growth mindset. They get up, they fall down. They get up, they fall down. They get up, they fall down. They don't fall down and say, I'll never get it, right? I'm never going to walk. They get up and they go again. And so it's finding ways to kind of nurture that kind of mindset that like, I just don't know it yet. I'm either really succeeding at something I'm trying or I'm learning from what happened. I told my son in basketball, you either win the game or you learn the game, which he hates. He thinks it's ridiculous. But I think it's really true. You learn a lot more from the questions you get wrong, the things that didn't go well. So how do you learn from that so that you can build on it and move forward and grow? And I think that's where growth mindset can be really valuable.
There's like a million other things I want to say now based on what you said, but I completely agree with that. I was an anxious little boy, so playing basketball was my first love, and at a certain point my anxiety took over how I played the sport. And my mom she tried everything under the sun. I'll give you $1 for every shot you make. We'll take you out to dinner, and none of it worked. And it was all it was fixed mindset, anxiety driven. Like, when I'm on the floor, I need to play perfectly. I remember my mom would be like, all the other little boys make mistakes. Like, it's okay. And it just, it didn't sink in. And that mindset followed me for all of my teen years. And then in adulthood, I feel like I experienced the onset of OCD. And that is when I just did a full kind of overhaul of just how I thought. And obviously that was motivated by the OCD specifically. So I think it's really important to talk about that fixed versus growth mindset, where failure is more of a tool, and it's less of a reflection on who you are as a person, but like, oh, I can go through this thing and make a mistake, and that's okay. Really, I'm just looking for the learning lesson in this so that I can, the next time, like what I'll say with people is like, fail forward, which has become my life. I think that there's obviously discomfort that comes with failure, or perceived failure, I should say. That's the better word. And also the instant gratification model that I think a lot of us are living in now, myself included. I don't think that I'm any different from other people. I always say that letting go is a passive process, or an active process, not a passive process. And part of letting go to me is like being patient and letting things unfold on the timeline that they were always meant to unfold on. You might have your version of what that timeline looks like, and then life has a different plan. And so I think that ties into that growth mindset where it's like, I'm just going to put myself out there and see what I learn, and be patient and let things unfold on the timeline that they're supposed to unfold on. And I see a lot of people in the OCD community, and people that have anxiety that I speak to, again, myself included. I don't think I'm better than anybody else or have any more of the answers, but really get hung up on like, I need to know this now, or I need to be good at this now, or I need to be certain now. And I do think that sort of puts fuel on the fire for those emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think OCD is really an illness of doubt and needing certainty and struggling with perception of doubt or the feeling of doubt. Did I do that? Did I check it? Am I okay? And so I think learning how to sit with some doubt and learn to let go, as you described, is so important. And to really share your own story. It's so wonderful that you are sharing your own experiences, because people who don't know how to talk about it or even how to experience it themselves just yet can really learn from that and really feel validated.
I agree. So as we part ways here today, I'm curious, what is one piece of advice that you would give someone who is trying to, maybe they're not even diagnosed with insomnia, but they've got some of these belief systems around sleep. Maybe they have sleep apnea, maybe they don't, but they want to start to improve their sleep hygiene. They want that time to feel like a gift and a luxury again. Where would you kind of start to point them?
Yeah, I would point out that if they have a human brain, they have the ability to sleep, and the ability to sleep well. So it's just a matter of being curious. What are some of the roadblocks? Are they internal? Are they external? And can I start to sort of peel them away, ideally? And then the line I always like to say is, your mind should be on your side. And I think learning how to be your own best advocate, to be self-compassionate, to be respectful of yourself, and as you're trying and growing, I think that's really important. So those are some key areas.
I think that's really important. If you have a brain, you are capable of getting great sleep. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, just thereflectivedoc.com, and I have my podcast. It's on Apple or Spotify, I think some others as well. It's just called The Reflective Doc, and I do have some episodes on insomnia and other sleep issues there if people want to check it out.
Amazing. I will be sure to tag that in the links below for this episode. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming on to the You're Not Alone podcast. Your wealth of knowledge. This is a really important topic, something that impacts a lot of people. So I'm hopeful that some of this information will get them on their path.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Zach, and a good night's rest to you and your wife tonight.
Yes, same to you.
Thank you.